Have you ever wondered if a single, quiet act of kindness could upend your entire life? If a stranger could walk in during your hardest season, not with a miracle, but with something simpler, recognition? It's easy to believe that little things don't matter, that generosity is just lost in the noise of survival. But I'm telling you, sometimes it's the smallest, least expected choices, a spare charger in an old pickup truck, a seat offered to a stranger in the freezing cold, that change the course of everything. If you've ever felt invisible or wondered whether human connection still means anything in a world that moves too fast, you're in the right place. Settle in, because the story I'm about to tell you, the story of Tom Carter, his son Miles, and the woman who changed their fate in the span of a single week, might just stay with you long after the screen goes dark. It began on a colorless Thursday afternoon, the kind of day that leaves winter stains on everything it touches. The sky in Oak Ridge was the soft gray of old socks, and the air held that iron chill that made you breathe with your shoulders. Tom Carter's pickup was a '97 Chevy, held together with duct tape and stubbornness, rattling in the grocery store parking lot like a washing machine left to die. The heater hadn't worked since his wife passed. The truck's only luxury was a working phone charger, and on a good day, the fact that it still ran at all. Inside the cab, Tom hunched in his battered Carhartt, gnawing on the world's saddest sandwich. Two slices of dry bread, a smear of peanut butter, nothing more. It wasn't the lunch he'd planned for himself. If he'd had another dollar to his name, maybe he'd have treated himself to the fried chicken from the deli. But today, like most days lately, his wallet was emptier than his stomach. Across the parking lot, families climbed into shiny new SUVs, laughter and grocery bags spilling everywhere. Tom watched, not with envy, but with the kind of practiced indifference you learn when life has taken more than its share. For Tom, every day was about managing the variables. Will the landlord knock tonight? Will there be enough in the checking account for gas? Will he be able to scrape together enough jobs this week to keep the heat on for Miles? His son, just 6, had inherited his late mother's optimism and Tom's stubborn jaw. Some days that felt like the only insurance against a world that didn't offer much else. A sudden knock on the window pulled Tom out of his spiral. He turned surprised to see a woman, maybe late 30s, maybe younger but worn out in that city way, standing by his passenger door. Her hair was pulled into a haphazard bun, cheeks red from the cold, a long navy coat already speckled with wet snow. In her hand, she clutched a phone and a look of hope that seemed almost painful. "Sorry," she mouthed through the glass, shivering. Could I just charge my phone for a few minutes? Mine died. I'm, sort of stranded." Tom blinked. He glanced at the frayed charger cable coiled on the dash, then at her, then back at the cable. Some days it feels like the universe hands you a choice. He reached over, unlocked the door, and said, "It's not much warmer in here, but at least it's dry. Come in." She slid into the cab, bringing a gust of snow and something like exhaustion with her. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft whir of the phone as it came back to life, and the faint breathing of two people who didn't have anything left to say to the world. "Thank you," she managed, tucking her numb hands into her sleeves. "It's a lot colder than I thought it'd be today." Tom shrugged. "Oak Ridge is always colder than it looks. I'm Tom, by the way." She hesitated, then offered a small, worn smile. "I'm Vivian. Thanks again. I know it's weird, just asking a stranger, but I didn't know what else to do. My ride left early, and my phone died, and I didn't want to go back inside and ask again. Felt like I'd already used up my last favor, you know?" Tom nodded. He understood more than he let on. "Sometimes you just gotta trust the kindness of the parking lot," he said, surprising even himself with the attempt at humor. Vivian laughed, a real laugh, shaky but genuine, and the ice between them cracked, just a little. As the minutes passed, Tom learned that Vivian wasn't from around here. She was passing through, she said, visiting an old friend, but didn't elaborate. She was careful with her words, careful with her eyes, but there was nothing guarded about the way she gripped the phone. Like a lifeline. Like if she let go, she'd sink. "You waiting for someone?" she asked after a while, gesturing at the half-eaten sandwich and the pile of children's books on the dash. "My son," Tom replied. "Miles. He's got after-school chess club, but really I think it's just an excuse to get out of spelling. Vivian smiled, the kind of smile you give when you want to show someone you get it, even if you don't. He sounds smart, like his dad. Tom nearly laughed at that, but something in her voice stopped him. Instead, he just nodded and turned back to the window. The silence settled again. Not awkward, but companionable. The quiet you get when two people both know what it's like to need a break. Just for a second. Vivian's phone finally buzzed to life. She exhaled, a soft sound of relief, and fumbled to text someone. "Thank you," she said again, reaching for the door. "I don't know what I'd have done if, well, thank you." Tom smiled, a real one this time. "Be careful. World's colder than it looks." She nodded, then stopped, looking at him one last time. "You ever think about how many times a day we just pass by each other? Like ghosts?" He thought about his own life, about all the strangers whose kindnesses had gone unnoticed, all the times he'd wished someone would just see him. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but every now and then, someone does something that makes you remember you're not alone." Vivian's smile deepened. Sadness and gratitude intermingled. "Thank you, Tom, for reminding me." And with that, she slipped out into the gray, disappearing into the static of the afternoon. When Miles arrived, his cheeks pink, eyes bright, shoes untied as always, Tom scooped him up in a bear hug, feeling the weight of the day lift just a little. The rest of the evening passed in the blur of survival. A pot of soup, a board game with missing pieces, Miles falling asleep with his head on Tom's knee. Yet as Tom cleaned up, he caught himself glancing at the empty passenger seat. He couldn't explain it, but he felt lighter, like for a brief moment, the universe had acknowledged his existence, even if just in the form of a tired stranger who needed a little help. The next 2 days unfolded with the quiet urgency of every other week. Tom patched a leaky faucet for a neighbor, stretched the last of the milk into breakfast for Miles, counted coins at the gas pump with the practiced hand of someone who's had to count too many. Vivian didn't come back. In truth, Tom didn't expect her to. He figured their paths had crossed, served their purpose, and moved on. That's the way these stories usually go, right? But sometimes the world throws you a curveball. On the morning of the third day, as Tom bundled Miles into his puffy red coat and drove him to school, something in the air felt different. Lighter, maybe, or just less heavy. The sun made a weak appearance through the clouds and Tom found himself humming along to the radio. After dropping Miles off, he headed to the hardware store to put in a job application. Anything really to keep the lights on for one more month. When he returned to the parking lot, his lot as he jokingly called it, a black sedan was idling in his usual spot. Tom's first instinct was annoyance. Who parks in someone else's spot in a nearly empty lot? But as he pulled closer, he noticed a man in a crisp gray suit standing by the sedan, scanning the area with the polite impatience of someone with more important places to be. The man approached as Tom got out, clipboard in hand, and offered a practiced smile. "Mr. Carter?" Tom hesitated. "Yeah, who's asking?" The man produced a white envelope, handed it to Tom with a nod. "Ms. Hart asked me to deliver this personally. She also requested that you and your son join her for lunch. If you're willing, there's a ride waiting for you." Tom blinked, stunned. "Ms. Hart?" "Yes, sir. Vivian Hart. She said you'd remember her." Tom stared down at the envelope, his heart thumping. It was heavy in his hands, the kind of weight that told him his life was about to pivot, whether he was ready or not. That's where our story really begins. The moment a tired, struggling, single dad realized that sometimes a small kindness isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the beginning. Personal reflection. I've spent years hearing stories like Tom's. Stories that start in desperation and end with a spark of hope. What never fails to move me is how these small acts of care, the ones we barely remember performing, can echo back in the most extraordinary ways. In Tom's world, a charger was just a convenience. In Vivian's, it was a lifeline. When their worlds collided, neither expected it to matter. But that's the thing about kindness. It doesn't check your bank balance, your scars, or your status. It just shows up quietly and waits to see what happens next. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, consider liking, subscribing, or just sharing it with someone who needs to believe in second chances again. The world needs more Toms and more Vivians, now more than ever. Tom stood frozen in the slush, the envelope trembling in his calloused fingers. A dozen half-formed worries crashed through his mind. Was this some scam? Was someone playing a joke? But the envelope was real, the ink on the front still smudged from being handled with care. And in that split second of indecision, Tom remembered the look in Vivian's eyes, the exhaustion, the gratitude, the honesty. Somehow he knew. This wasn't a trick. It was something rare and real. He fumbled open the envelope, expecting maybe a thank you card, a gift card, a note scrawled in haste. But inside was a letter written in an elegant, steady hand. The words were simple, but carried the weight of someone who'd had to learn how to say thank you the hard way. Tom, I don't know how to explain the last few days except to say you reminded me what kindness feels like when it isn't expected or asked for. You gave me a moment of shelter, and I want to return that gift. I've arranged for a car to bring you and your son to lunch. Please say yes. No obligations, no expectations, just a chance to breathe. With gratitude, Vivian. Tom read the letter twice, then looked up at the man in the suit. You sure this is for me? The man's smile was polite, but not fake. If you're Tom Carter, then yes, sir. Ms. Hart asked me to wait until you were ready. She's at the airfield outside town, and she said to bring Miles if you'd like. The word airfield stopped Tom cold. He'd never been on a private jet. He'd barely ever flown, period. For a second, he almost said no, his heart hammering, every bone in his body telling him that invitations like this come with strings. But then he pictured Miles at school, his gap-toothed grin, his constant hope. Maybe just this once the world was offering something back. Tom drove to the school, nerves tight, rehearsing what he'd say to the principal. But the man in the suit had already handled everything. Miles was waiting at the front office, backpack slung over one shoulder, confusion and excitement all over his face. Dad, are we in trouble? He whispered as they stepped outside together. Tom knelt and brushed snow from Miles's boots. Not today, kiddo. Someone just wants to say thank you to us. He could see Miles trying to puzzle it out, but the boy just nodded, accepting it the way only children can. The driver opened the car door with a flourish, and soon they were off, winding through back roads, the city falling away, silence settling between father and son as the world shifted beneath their feet. The airfield was nothing like Tom expected. It was small, almost humble, just a single hangar, a patchwork of tarmac, and a gleaming silver jet with no markings except a simple VH near the tail. Vivian stood near the stairs, coat unbuttoned, hair blowing in the wind, every inch the woman Tom remembered. Only now, her eyes were brighter, her smile warmer. She looked like someone who'd finally taken a breath after years of holding it in. She greeted them with a hug, not a handshake, not a polite nod, but a genuine embrace that left Tom speechless and Miles beaming. Welcome, she said, voice thick with emotion. Thank you for coming. The inside of the jet was softer, quieter than Tom imagined. Leather seats, warm lights, the faint scent of citrus. Miles immediately claimed a seat by the window, pressing his face to the glass, mouth open in wonder. Tom settled in across from Vivian, nerves jangling. He felt out of place, like a character in someone else's story, but she quickly put him at ease. I'm not used to this either, she confessed, glancing around at the understated luxury. But sometimes when you've lost your place in the world, you need to see it from above, just to remember it's still turning. As the jet took off, Tom's worries melted away, replaced by a slow, quiet awe. He found himself talking about work, about Miles, about Emily, about the weight of grief and the ache of trying to stay afloat. Vivian listened with a rare patience, not interrupting, not fixing, just hearing. She spoke too, but not about her money or her business. She told him about losing her sister, about how loneliness feels different when you're surrounded by people who only see your name, not your soul. Lunch was simple: chicken soup, warm bread, chocolate milk for Miles, strong coffee for Tom. They ate slowly, laughter coming easier as the miles unspooled beneath them. For the first time in a long time, Tom allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the world could be kind. The jet touched down hours later at a secluded retreat in the mountains. Vivian's getaway, she explained. Not a palace, but a wooden house built by hand, nestled among evergreens. The air was clean and cold, the kind that made you feel new again. For 3 days, they were given a gift Tom didn't know how to accept. Time. Time to breathe, to rest, to let Miles run free and wild, to sit by a fire with a cup of tea and say nothing at all. No bills, no landlords, no phone calls from creditors. Just peace. At first, Tom felt awkward, useless. He fixed a loose stair, chopped wood, cleaned up after meals. Vivian let him, never treating him like a guest or a charity case. They were just two people, broken in their own ways, keeping each other company. At night, when Miles had drifted off, Tom and Vivian would talk by the fire. He told her how hard it had been after Emily died, how sometimes he felt like he was just pretending to be a good dad, hoping nobody would notice he was making it all up. Vivian listened, her eyes reflecting the flames. "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" Tom asked one night, voice barely above a whisper. "All the time," she replied. "But lately I'm starting to think maybe this is the life I was supposed to find. Not the glamorous one, the real one." That struck Tom deep. Maybe there was no going back to what was lost. Maybe forward was the only direction worth fighting for. On the third day, Vivian handed Tom a simple folder. Inside was a business proposal, a plan for a garage, a small shop on the edge of Oak Ridge, where Tom could fix cars, teach others, and maybe start over. She'd cover the initial costs, she said. No strings, no expectations. Tom stared at the papers, heart pounding. "I can't accept this." "Yes, you can," Vivian said, her voice gentle but firm. "You gave me hope. Let me give you a place to build on it." He looked at her, really looked at her, and realized he'd been waiting for someone to believe in him. Not as a project, not as a cause, but as a man. Tears pricked his eyes and he didn't bother to hide them. "Thank you," he managed, "for everything." Vivian squeezed his hand. "Thank you for saving me too. I didn't know I needed it until you did." On the flight home, Miles curled up between them, snoring softly, his hands sticky from marshmallows roasted over a real fire. Tom felt lighter, as if some of the weight he'd carried for so long had been lifted, not by luck, but by the simple, stubborn miracle of human kindness. Personal reflection. I've come to believe that kindness, real kindness, isn't flashy or loud. It's quiet. It sits with you when you're sad. It shows up, unasked for, in parking lots and midnight kitchens, and the pages of a book you didn't know you needed. And when you pass it on, you don't just give someone a better day. You give them a reason to believe that healing is possible, that love might still find them, that tomorrow's worth showing up for. If you've ever doubted the power of small gestures, of simply listening, simply helping, let Tom's story remind you. You have no idea what difference you're making or how your smallest kindness might come back in ways you never imagined. The days after returning home felt strange, as if Tom was waking up inside someone else's dream. For the first time in years, he had hope blooming quietly beside the old anxiety, an unfamiliar mix, both exhilarating and terrifying. The folder Vivian had handed him sat on the kitchen table, its contents read and reread until the corners grew soft and the possibilities became almost real. He shared the news with Miles one rainy evening, after grilled cheese and a long, messy game of checkers. "What if we had our own place, kiddo? A garage, maybe with snacks and cartoons for you and tools for me?" Miles grinned wide, imagining oil stains and stacks of tires. "Would I get to be your helper?" "First one hired," Tom promised, heart full. But when Tom told a few folks in town about the plan, not everyone understood. Some looked at him with pity, others with suspicion. "You sure this isn't too good to be true, Tom? People like us don't get handed lifelines. Don't get your hopes up." Their doubts stung, but Tom just smiled quietly and let them roll off. He'd learned something from Vivian. Sometimes you have to believe in your own story before anyone else will. As the days ticked by, Vivian's help was never heavy-handed. She called, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to talk through ideas for the garage, what it could be, who it could serve, how it might help others the way Tom had helped her. Her faith in him was steady, gentle, like sunlight on an old wooden floor, never pushing, always warming. Spring arrived. The first checks cleared. The lease was signed. Tom and Miles spent weekends scraping peeling paint, fixing wiring, sweeping out years of dust and cobwebs from the little building on the edge of Main Street. Linda Chen, Vivian's architect friend, visited once with a yellow notepad and a ready laugh, offering clever suggestions and encouragement. Slowly, room by room, hope became tangible. A bright red toolbox, shelves for spare parts, a waiting area with a battered couch and a donated coffee pot. The first official customer was a retired nurse with a flat tire and a pocket full of quarters. Tom fixed her car, refused her money, and sent her off with a cup of free coffee. Word spread. Soon there were more cars, more faces, struggling parents, young men just out of the service, a single mom trying to make it to her second job. Nobody left with shame or empty hands. The pay-what-you-can jar filled slowly, enough to keep the lights on. Vivian visited one sunny Friday, jeans and a flannel shirt, her hair pulled back, a bag of groceries slung over her shoulder. She and Tom worked side by side. She swept, he turned wrenches, Miles passed out cookies. In the soft dusk after closing, as they sat on the curb sipping coffee, Tom realized he wasn't waiting for life to return to what it had been. He was living in something new, but life as it does kept moving. There were setbacks. The heater broke during a late cold snap. Tom's old truck finally died for good. There were nights when worry and old sadness crept back in. But now he wasn't alone. Vivian was never far, with her steady presence, her refusal to let him give up. Miles, too, was changing, laughing more, sleeping better, asking about the stars at night. One afternoon, as the garage buzzed with the sound of power tools and easy laughter, a woman pulled in with a Lexus, a car too new, too glossy for the neighborhood. She stepped out and looked around, uncertain, clutching a baby in one arm and a broken stroller in the other. Tom wiped his hands on a rag and walked over. "Can I help you?" She hesitated, eyes darting between the faded sign and the battered minivans. "Do you really help anyone?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "Even people like me?" Tom smiled softly. "We help people who need help. That's the only rule." She exhaled, shoulders slumping with relief. "Thank you. I've had a really hard week." He fixed her stroller, refusing any payment, and handed her a free sandwich from the fridge. As she drove off, she waved, tears glinting in her eyes. It hit Tom in that moment. The real work wasn't fixing engines or balancing budgets. It was meeting people in the middle of their storm, being the quiet space they could breathe for a minute. He was, in a way, doing for others what Vivian had done for him. And still, every once in a while, Tom would catch Vivian looking at him across the workshop, her eyes tired but bright, and something would spark between them. A promise, not spoken but deeply understood, that kindness can rebuild lives in ways no one expects. Late that summer, on a warm night, they sat together on the roof of the garage. Miles was asleep inside, the hum of crickets rising from the fields. Tom pulled the first letter from his pocket, the one Vivian had left in the truck. He unfolded it, the paper now thin and worn. He looked at Vivian, his voice rough with gratitude. "I never thought letting someone charge a phone could change everything," he said. Vivian reached for his hand, her smile soft. "You didn't just let me charge my phone, Tom. You let me be seen. You reminded me I still mattered, even when I couldn't see it myself." Tom squeezed her hand, holding it tight. "You did the same for me, more than you'll ever know." There was no grand confession, no cinematic kiss, no dramatic music swelling. Just the quiet certainty that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can spark a chain of hope that spreads farther than we'll ever see. I've learned something from telling this story. You never know what part you're playing in someone else's turning point. You might be the reason they don't give up. You might be the stranger whose kindness saves a life. Or you might just be the dad who finally lets himself believe in second chances. If this story moved you, share it. Let someone else remember that kindness still exists, even in the smallest, messiest moments. And if you're ever the one waiting in a cold parking lot, don't lose hope. The next chapter could be closer than you think. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for believing in the power of stories that heal. If this touched you, hit like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments. What's the smallest act of kindness you ever received that changed your life? Until next time, take care of yourself and each other. Second chances are everywhere.